Tokyo Ghoul is one of the most visually stunning, thematically rich, and emotionally resonant stories I've ever encountered across any medium. I fell in complete love with this story. It provided everything that matters to me in a good story, and then so much more. Let me just list out some of the unbelievable qualities of this manga to get this party started. We have Kaneki, one of the most complex and intricate main characters ever, one whose journey is as layered and transformative as it is tragic and raw. We have some of the coolest metafictional storytelling I've ever come across. This is a story with a main character who starts off as a book nerd whose favorite author ends up publishing their final book with him as the main character, that final book essentially being the story we're reading. We have a sprawling sidecar stacked to the brim with memorable figures who contribute so much to the story on so many levels, managing to stand on their own 2 feet while always complementing Kaneki's journey as the main character who the story revolves around, more so than many other stories of this length. We have a plot that constantly keeps you on your feet, from conspiracies to mysteries to plot twists that make this one of the most rewarding experiences for attentive readers. We have incredible world building, which was the last thing I was expecting from a story like this. And when I say world building, I don't mean it in the physically constructing a world sense, because Tokyo is literally in the title of the series, but in how it pertains to the thematic framework of the story. Separating the society of this world into distinct camps at the beginning, with the lines being blurred slowly but surely as the story progresses, ultimately echoing the final statement that they are all the main characters of their own tragedies, no matter what side of the border they started on. And lastly, and this one kinda goes without saying, we have an abundance of incredibly emotional moments that genuinely had me floored. I don't really do reviews on this channel, but this story has come to mean too much to me not to. And I also wanted to make this video to feel like the beginning of a journey, because I'm planning to make a bunch of videos analyzing different topics surrounding the series. So this simple, laid-back discussion on my experience will serve as a basic opinion piece, a gateway into my thoughts on Tokyo Ghoul. With that being said, I hope you enjoy. My journey with Tokyo Ghoul has been anything but smooth. I attempted to read it twice before and couldn't stick with it for reasons that have very little to do with the story itself. I've even owned the box set for part 1 since 2020 COVID days. Like many, I watched season 1 of the anime when it first aired and took the world by storm, but by the time I transitioned into more of a manga reader and left anime behind, I'd pretty much forgotten everything besides Kaneki vs Jason, because the way he twisted his leg back into place was the coolest ever to my 13-year-old self. Then I met one of my best friends on the internet who's been trying to get me to read the manga for basically as long as I've known him. Unfortunately, this clown goes by the name of Sen Eto, which in of itself spoiled me on one of the biggest twists and reveals of the original series, but mainly for his sake and also because the series just piqued my interest. I started it on stream and got about 4 volumes in before life got in the way and I never continued. And beyond just life getting in the way and being a terrible streamer who struggles to stay consistent, those first 5 or so volumes, while still being good, didn't really provide me with anything monumental that urged me to keep on reading. Simply put, I wasn't hooked. This time I read it off stream and I was in a manga reading mood because I breezed through the first few volumes and I was having a pretty decent time. I was enjoying myself. Then I reached the Aogiri Tree arc and everything just clicked. That's where I think most people would agree that Ishida truly comes into his own as a writer. The presentation gets significantly better both artistically and in the unfolding of the plot, as well as Kaneki's character undergoing his very first dramatic transformation. From that point onwards, I was locked in. I was having the time of my life reading this manga, binging through the rest of the series with a speed I haven't tapped into in years. If it wasn't for me streaming some of the most popular sections of the story, I probably would have read from Aogiri Tree to the end of Ri in a few days. That's how much I was enjoying myself. I started this video listing off some of the series' greatest strengths. Let's take a closer look at some of these. Tokyo Ghoul has this one-of-a-kind aesthetic that takes advantage of its modernity and the fact that it's digitally drawn. The way the art is stylized, the incorporation of real-world photography and textures, the range of brushes and effects Ishida uses for his illustrations, it embraces the digital medium completely, and as a story set in modern-day Tokyo, this is all very appropriate. There's a calculated chaos to Ishida's artistic identity, and that's most evident in the color spreads. I haven't seen a painting style quite like Ishida's in any manga I've ever read, but it also holds for the actual pages of the manga itself. It feels somewhat messy and unrefined, but in the best way you could imagine. imagine. There's a real grittiness that gives the presentation so much personality and complements the nature of the story perfectly. And there's a real range to his illustrations. Each page feels distinctly designed to supplement the tone of the scene, as any good manga artist should do. Lighthearted scenes have a cleaner, brighter look to them, and when things get crazy, which they do basically all the time in this story, the art reflects that too. Sketchy and messy but explosive line and ink work, intense shading, weird perspectives and proportions, insanely exaggerated facial expressions, essentially every trick in the bag that makes pages feel striking and eye-catching. He's constantly breaking rules in an effort to make you feel, to convey the inner turmoil these characters are experiencing. And above all, when it comes to presentation, Tokyo Ghoul easily has some of the most layered and effective use of symbolism I've ever seen. It develops its own symbolic language that stretches across the entire story, one that can definitely feel convoluted and overwhelming at times because there's just so much going on with these obscure symbols. The flowers, the masks, the eyes, the use of blacks, whites and greys, even the kagune and the quinkes, really just the character designs in general. There's so much information being filtered through visuals that nothing is ever just there for vibes. There's a wealth of value in every illustration, and that makes it one of the most rewarding stories to deeply examine. Moving on from visual presentation, the next big strength I'd like to cover is the narrative presentation, in essence, the plotting. This story practically never drags. In fact, if I have any issue with the story's pacing, it would be that it was a little too rapid at times, especially in the latter half of Re, which we know is because Ishida was rushed and sits at the massive table of mangaka who have suffered due to the demands of weekly serialization. But regardless, I didn't feel much rush, especially where it matters. The series never sacrifices thematic clarity. It gets what it needs to get done pretty much flawlessly for the most part. I mean, my favorite arc is Dragon War, which is infamous for rushing the end of the story, and I don't feel that whatsoever. The final volume is very easily the best in the entire series to me. There's definitely secondary or tertiary elements of Tokyo Ghoul that could have done with further exploration, but as far as the main story goes, as far as Kaneki's story goes, I felt like everything got at least the time it deserved. And besides pacing, practically every other element of its plotting is genuinely remarkable. It's so incredibly efficient despite being so dense. 30 sounds like a lot of volumes, but what it accomplishes in terms of density and scope is really on the same level of stories like Naruto and Bleach, which are over double the length. And that's without maximizing on the potential of all the concepts present. Imagine we got even more lore about the history of the world, the original One-Eyed King. I don't view the absence of this lore as a negative because the story is very much focused on the character journey of Kaneki and the present timeline, meaning there were no promises of rich lore spanning decades, but it obviously could have been a huge positive if we did get those things, as they could elevate the events of the present. But regardless, it's just so unbelievably tight and efficient, even if it might speed up a little too much sometimes. But it only speeds up like that because Ishida is playing a very risky game with just how electric the story is. It's constantly moving with unbelievable momentum. Yes, there's definitely moments of respite, stretches here and there where the story calms down and we take a breather, and that's necessary. But 90% of the time, it's operating at 100%, which is what gives the story its identity and must have made it a very fulfilling weekly experience. I'm glad I wasn't weekly though, because binging this for the first time gave me one of the most addictive reads I've ever had. And lastly, regarding the plot, Tokyo Ghoul is such an interconnected web of a story. Like a tapestry, everything connects to everything else. The story structure is clearly something Ishida spent so much of his energy trying to get right, and I can comfortably say he absolutely succeeded. There's so many seemingly minor details that become central later on. There's foreshadowing everywhere. There's constant callbacks that make you feel good when you notice them. There are so many long-spanning symbolic threads, like the birdcage metaphor from the very first volume brought back up by Kano, then tying directly into the premise of the final arc, the Dragon War, and ultimately concluding in Furuta's final chapter. Tokyo Ghoul is an absolute goldmine for attentive readers. There's so much intentionality, meaning almost every single detail in this story feels very deliberate. It feels like a piece of the greater whole. There are various other general strengths to the story. The thematic framework is a real beast that's very difficult to try and summarize in just a few sentences, but just like the plot, it's incredibly cohesive despite how dramatically the story evolves and the scope widens over the course of its 30-volume run. I've never been a fan of just listing out themes a story has because it's pretty worthless to do so by itself, and the actual exploration of those themes is what really matters, but I'm gonna do it for Tokyo Ghoul because I think it's just astonishing how much it manages to cover with such a simple premise, and this is just a small fraction of them. Duality sits at the center of the story, as an examination of identity revolving around the divide between humanity and ghouls, and with the ghouls really being no different to humans in anything other than their appetites, the story blurs the lines between these binaries, between these two camps, treating both as different kinds of humans in an effort to dissect the human experience at large and what constitutes a human beyond just simple biology. It's a story of the lonely, isolated from civilization, yearning for love and connection. It questions what it truly means to be strong, which almost feels like a requisite for every story with supernatural powers, but the way it does so lands with such impact because of the kind of person Kaneki is. Learning to love and accept all parts of himself, that is the answer the story arrives at regarding true strength. And with just how much self-loathing and suffering Kaneki goes through over the course of the story, it makes the really quite simple answer of keep moving forward feel genuinely life-changing to experience. Parenthood and legacy, the corruption of innocence, faith in the search for meaning in a seemingly godless world. Tokyo Ghoul really does it all, and it manages this by being an ever-changing story. The narrative itself functions like the internal journey of our main protagonist, both going through several transformations and rebirths, all leading up to the final metamorphosis. Speaking of metamorphosis, something else this story is filled to the brim with is intertextuality, referencing other works and incorporating them into its own framework. The main character is literally a book nerd, so the very first chapter has mention of Osamu Dazai, with the second chapter opening with a reference to Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis. Hermann Hesse is directly quoted in the final page of the 8th chapter, establishing the birdcage symbolism that continues until the very end of the story. Carl Jung is quoted directly by Kaneki, and even outside of literature, there are things like Tsukiyama playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata in chapter 41. There are so many references everywhere. There's even a very cheeky nod to Hisoka vs. Krollo in the penultimate arc. And these are all cool by themselves, but what makes their inclusion really impressive is just how much mileage Ishida gets from incorporating them. All of the literature references generally come from Kaneki himself, and this forms the basis of his main character complex, how he draws parallels between his own life and the works of fiction he's been reading since he was a young boy. My very first analysis on the story will be focused on exploring this complex. I've already started writing it. Kaneki's relationship with his own role as the protagonist of Tokyo Ghoul. It's beautifully metafictional in a way that brings you closer to the character, especially if you're somebody who sees themselves in the stories they experience. That's probably the most relatable thing about Kaneki to me. And perhaps what I love most about these literary references is how they complement the dominant tone of the story, which I would describe as a Shakespearean tragedy. As I just said, I have a huge video on Kaneki coming very soon, so for today I just want to glaze the kid. I just want to pour some honey and ramble about what makes him the GOAT. Kaneki simultaneously has one of the most complex and ambitious character arcs I've ever witnessed, while feeling so grounded and organic. Despite how grand and almost mythic his arc becomes, literally becoming the one-eyed king destined to save the world, it always remains intimate. We are with him from day one and witness everything by his side. He goes through so many phases to the point that picking up a random volume of the series will most likely greet you with a different Kaneki almost every single time. Kaneki never stops being Kaneki. He has that unchanging core, absolutely, but that core does sometimes get obscured. It sometimes gets buried beneath the trauma. Hell, one of his phases is literally an amnesiac with an entirely new name because he doesn't want to confront the terrifying possibility he ate and killed his best friend. What makes Kaneki so emotionally resonant to so many readers is his very humble and relatable beginnings. It's just very grounded despite the supernatural status of the series. Even if you don't relate to him, you've definitely met a Kaneki before. He's just a college kid who likes reading books and is way too shy to talk to the girls he likes. Kaneki at the start of Tokyo Ghoul is probably not too different to a good chunk of the guys watching this video right now. He's your average everyday dude who gets done dirty by life and begins to change so dramatically there are times where he's practically unrecognizable. But while he undergoes drastic transformations and the story itself moves so far beyond the initial struggle of reconciling the ghoul and human aspects of his identity, the underlying struggle that's present from the very beginning never really goes away. Who the hell am I? Existentialism is the crux of the character, and it applies on so many levels, from questioning his own humanity, to navigating through his sense of self-importance as a main character of his own story, to finding out he was practically designed to be a symbol of somebody else's story, his favorite author at that. Add all of the trauma he's faced throughout his life, from the death of his father, the abuse of his mother, and of course everything he goes through during the series from torture to brainwashing, and those questions of who the hell am I and what is the meaning of my existence become very loaded. What I love about all this is that it's ultimately just in Kaneki's head. It's all psychological. That's why a simple realization is sufficient to conclude this 30-volume character arc filled with progressions and regressions. The simple recognition that he is not alone in these struggles, that he isn't the main character who must carry every burden villain alone, that everybody is the main character of their own story. That's what finally saves Kaneki. And of course there's more to it as well, the synthesizing of the disparate parts of himself, each persona he embodies over the course of the story coming together in one individual, in Ken Kaneki, from the black-haired passive victim he started as, to the white-haired detached protector he becomes following Jason's torture, to his rebirth as the amnesiac Heise Sasaki who mixes the two personas in search of normalcy, to the Black Reaper and then the One-Eyed King. All of those play their own role, but all of them are equally the same person, and bringing together those different parts of himself into one complete individual is the truest testament of the strength Kaneki achieves at the end of the story. In accepting that each of these fragments, these dissociative coping mechanisms he allowed to define him, were all equally valid and all equally true. In that sense, his character journey reminds me a lot of Kurosaki Ichigo's, which you may know as one of my favorite characters of all time, attaining enlightenment by accepting these conflicting sides of himself and achieving inner balance. Another way he reminds me of Ichigo is how he is manipulated by others over the course of the story, this potentially being my favorite aspect of Kaneki's character. Both are born in the dark, thrust into becoming the main character in stories by people who know so much more about them and keep vital, intimate information away from them. And they're expected to carry unbelievable burdens by the people that place them in these stories. They have such grand hopes for them, a vision of ushering in a new era for the world. For these reasons, Kaneki's dynamics with Eto and Arima are some of my favorite ever, and Furuta swooping in to hijack the narrative they had carved for him is one of my absolute favorite concepts for a main villain ever. There is so much more I could say about Kaneki, but this is meant to be a simple review of the entire series, so I'll be moving on to the rest of the cast. As I said, you can expect a more focused analysis on Kaneki in the near future. If Kaneki is the beating heart of Tokyo Ghoul, then the cast around him is the blood itself. Everything flows to and from the main character. But really, there's so many reasons why the cast of Tokyo Ghoul is just remarkable. The sheer number of great characters is a feat in of itself, but what I find most impressive is how well utilized the cast is across the board. Even relatively insignificant characters like Hinami or Kanae or Eto's mother Ukina feel so realized in such a short span of time. Damn near every single character of note is capitalized on, and there are definitely exceptions, but they are few and far between. The parallels between characters, how two individuals that may have never interacted are so crucial for understanding the other that they practically complete each other, the range and depth of human psychology explored when aggregating the cast as a whole. Every member of the ensemble comes together to tell this story, reflecting a different perspective on the core ideas of the series. Almost every single villain, even the most despicable like Donato and Torso, are laced with some degree of empathy and purpose, blurring the line between good and evil in ways that make the story feel hauntingly real, reminding us that each of these individuals are products of this world that is so wrong on so many levels. Arima is one of the most terrific antagonists I've ever encountered, who is so perfectly presented over the course of the story. Beginning as this myth of a man with a veneer of darkness that makes you question the so-called humanity of the CCG investigators who are meant to live to serve, and then that myth of Arima slowly being broken over the course of the story as he gains more and more screen time and slowly becomes humanized. Only for his death to pull a 180 and go back to that myth, cementing his legend even further by recontextualizing everything we thought we knew about him with the grand reveal of his status as the One-Eyed King, and of course his partnership with Eto, and the legacy they left behind to be inherited by Kaneki. Rise is one of the most tragic presences in the story precisely because of her absence. She literally started this story alongside Furuta, and yet she has never once granted the privilege of asserting her own will onto the narrative, denied any real agency. She functions as a ghost who haunts the story, the one to have shaped the entire story, the biggest influence on the ultimate villain, and yet, beyond the very first chapter, beyond being the spark that set Kaneki's story in motion, she is never truly part of Tokyo Ghoul. Rise exists as a projection, the ghost in Kaneki's mind, Dr. Kano's experiment, Furuta's weapon factory. Every version of her we see is filtered through someone else's perception. Rise is less of an individual character and more of a tool for the narrative, and in the eyes of our protagonist, she is sometimes a curse and sometimes a blessing. Yoshimura as this thematic ideal who hopes for a brighter future, glimmering in stark contrast to the darkness that makes up most of the story. with a presence that persists long after his death and echoes into the very final page of the manga. Amon is the other side of Kaneki's coin, together making up one of the most crucial dynamics in the story as the counterpart who almost goes through as many transformations as the protagonist himself. Toka as this fierce bundle of courage, desperately trying to reconcile her nature, the cards she was dealt as a ghoul, with her yearnings for a normal, happy life, in some ways mirroring Furuta in that regard. Yomo just being the coolest guy ever. Uta somehow being even cooler. Kano scratching my Kenjaku itch as a mad scientist with zero filter who has his hands in every pocket of the plot. Tsukiyama's flamboyance providing consistent entertainment but also masking a huge heart that was brought out by Kaneki. Urie starting off as an insufferable edgelord embodying all the darkness of the CCG but slowly breaking out of this shell and learning to feel for the ones he loves, learning to understand his own flaws and genuinely maturing. I wish I had the time to do this for all of my favorite characters, but we genuinely be here all day. Much like another story I adore, Tokyo Ghoul seriously thrives in its caste structure, with different groups and factions that function as cohesive entities shaped around the main character at its core. And what makes this structure so impressive is the way all of these different groups interact, with shared histories, with influence on each other, with many of them existing because of the other factions. It all comes together to make this web, and complements the thematic framework of the story, the ghoul and human spectrum and how those lines are blurred. Our protagonists are the evil ghouls and the antagonists are the good humans fighting to protect the world at the beginning. But it doesn't take very long to learn that this is a gross oversimplification of this world, and the truth, like most things in this story, lies in the nuances. The CCG as an entity is one of my favorites in manga period for just how drastically it evolves over the course of the story in so many unbelievable ways. The tone surrounding them constantly changes. The main character joins them at one point. The revelation of the Washu family completely recontextualizes them. The ultimate villain hijacks them. It's genuinely astonishing how much mileage Ishida was able to get from a single organization. While this is the story of Kaneki, it's just as much the story of the world at large and all the fractured souls within it. Seeing as I just mentioned the ultimate villain, let's talk about him. If you followed my read through on Twitch or Twitter, you likely already know that Furuta Nimura is comfortably my favorite character in Tokyo Ghoul. It's pretty much guaranteed I'll be making a video solely focused on him sometime in the future. Don't expect it soon because I have so many thoughts that still haven't fully come together, but it's definitely gonna happen someday. I love this guy beyond words. It's very rare for me to tear up reading manga, and it's doubly rare for me to get emotional during a live stream. This guy did the impossible and had me tearing up reading his final chapter in front of a couple hundred people. To be fair, my camera wasn't on, but I probably would have shed some tears regardless. But on the flip side, and this is very crucial to Furuta's appeal, he also had me laughing like I've never laughed before in the middle of the night because I was streaming at crazy hours thanks to time zones on multiple occasions. Genuinely one of the most entertaining presences ever put to page. He's on that Yujiro Hanma, Sato, Hisoka levels of consistently grabbing every modicum of your attention simply by appearing. An absolute freak of nature, doing everything he does for the love of the game. I just fucking love this guy. I genuinely don't even know where to begin talking about him. He had an impact on me I never could have expected seeing him for the first time, and I'm not talking about his cameo at Kaneki's University in part 1, I'm talking about his introduction in Re as a member of the CCG. The presentation of Furuta, both visually and the actual technical integration of his role in the plot, is some of the most impressive I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing. Furuta's formal introduction is up there as one of the most lackluster, forgettable things in the entire story. And it's absolute cinema because bear in mind, I'm talking about the final villain. He's deliberately placed alongside perhaps the creepiest design in a story filled with creepy designs, the deranged Kijima of the CCG. So he's obviously completely overshadowed. This decision alone tells you so much about Ishida's vision for Furuta's character. Initially presented as a seemingly throwaway minor character who provides a little more than comic relief, with this being a carefully curated facade that allows him to dwell in the shadows not just in the minds of the characters within the story, but the readers as well. This is the guy who started this entire story, inadvertently saving Kaneki's life by dropping the steel beams on Rize, the smiling clown that appears in the final chapters of part 1. Even his informal introduction functions the same way. Only like 5% of readers will leave that moment thinking there will be more to this character. He just feels like a no-name name random that exists solely to up the emotional weight of Toka's visit at Kaneki's university, as someone reading a book with a similar appearance to the man she loves. But nothing about Furuta is coincidental. He looks like Kaneki for a reason. Nothing about Furuta doesn't serve at least 2, 3, or 4 purposes. Everything is calculated as he slowly steps out of the shadows and takes the reins of the story, remaining several steps ahead of everybody else throughout practically the entire run of the manga. There's so much more to say on just this small aspect of his character, how he's introduced and generally presented over the course of the story, but that would be better served for a video exclusively on him. Furuta is one of those characters who can do virtually anything and still be entertaining. A clown in the truest sense. A straight up agent of chaos who just wants to watch the world burn. A man of theatre. An actor constantly delivering Oscar-worthy performances as he plays with the minds of others like gaslighting and manipulation is an art form. He's this uncanny mixture of humor, cruelty, pettiness, and theatrical flair that all coexists wonderfully and morphs into an endlessly entertaining experience. You're constantly guessing which parts of him are genuine, which parts are performance, and he seems to enjoy that confusion as much as the audience does. It's all just a big game to him. He knows his time in this life is running out and he wants to do a little trolling. He wants to make the most out of it. In a story full of unbelievable tragedy, Furuta shows up just to take the piss. He doesn't care about your sad backstory. His is probably sadder. He's just chosen to turn his bitterness into comedy and carnage. Of course, there's way more to the character, and this short analysis is definitely lacking in nuance, but that's the beauty of him. What I just described is his exterior, the superficial outside layer he shows to the world, and he wears this identity so well, I guarantee you a lot of people out there think that this is all there is to Furuta Nimura. He engages with everyone like pieces on his personal chessboard. As I said, he's playing a game, and that's probably the dominant motif of this broken child who never got to grow up. The chapter where Kaneki's defeated literally ends with game over. And since it's all a game to him, the moments he shares with other characters are always quirky. Even when he's engaging with his mortal enemies, there's this playful disrespect that creates some unforgettable interactions. Whether he's taunting Kaneki, slowly taking control over the CCG, interrogating Eto, whatever the hell he's doing, there's always this condescending energy that definitely drives everybody around him insane. Furuta is the ultimate troll, and I'd never want to cross paths with somebody like him in the flesh, but as an outside observer reading this story, I love it. Of course though, this is a character who had an unbelievable emotional impact on me, so it wouldn't be right to talk about him without covering that emotional core. Beneath all the trolling, there's a very human yearning for a better, simpler life. He's just a Kaneki who embraced destruction over connection. He lashes out at the world because the world failed him, just like it failed so many others in Tokyo Ghoul. He really is no different to the majority of the cast, despite feeling so special and one of a kind. And he feels that way because while his suffering is by no means unique, the way he expresses it absolutely is. Others in this story confront their pain with anguish or avoid their pain with obsessions and coping mechanisms. Not Furuta. Furuta is painfully aware of his suffering. He never allows himself to forget, and it's the fuel that keeps him going every waking second. It is his ultimate motivator as he weaponizes all the wrong that's been dealt to him and returns it onto the world with chaotic glee. It's devastating to see someone so similar to Kaneki at his core warped into a complete monster lacking any shred of empathy as he unleashes his anger on everybody that crosses his path. It's so messy and unpredictable, but it makes him so magnetic every time he's on the page. And after reading that final volume and learning who Furuta truly is, it also makes him so lamentable and genuinely heartbreaking to think about. I love this character beyond words. I love his design, his mind games, his humor, his rage, his backstory, his final moments, his slow rise to power. I love every single thing about Furuta. Easily one of the most layered and memorable antagonists I will ever come across. And that's basically everything I have to say. This is why I don't like doing series reviews. They feel kinda aimless, and when I reach the end, I don't feel like I've really accomplished much, but it needed to be done because now that it has become one of my favorite manga and I've seriously fallen in love with it, I'm going to be thinking about Tokyo Ghoul all the time, which means you can definitely expect many videos about the series on the channel. I've already started working on the Kaneki video I mentioned earlier on. I mentioned it like 2 times. So if you're new here, consider subscribing if you'd like to see some video essays on Tokyo Ghoul, and if you enjoyed the video, let me know by leaving a like. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and for the few who'd like to take the support even further, the link to my Patreon is in the description. Have a good one, and I'll see you in the next one.